The podcast you're about to listen to may contain random lines from musical theater, terrible attempts at regional accents, and a sincere discussion about mental health. You have been warned. Are you ready to start singing with your feet? Formidable! Allez, c'est parti! Non, nous ne sommes pas fous, nous ne sommes pas ivres, nous sommes juste dans la joie. Une joie profonde, nos cœurs elle inonde. Cette joie, elle vient du ciel. Non, nous ne sommes pas fous.
Welcome to Sing With Your Feet, the podcast in which we imagine ourselves living in homes with stained glass windows of our own design. The podcast in which, on the occasion of your fairy godmother's birthday, we talk about one of the inevitable facets of getting older, and we get ready for it with a hefty dose of prevention. The podcast in which Freud and the Philosopher Princess go head-to-head, and the Philosopher Princess scores a point. My name is Lily Fields, and I'm going to be your fairy godmother for the next half hour or so. Na, little Fields. Oh, that? That's you, Cinderella. Yeah, you sound like a Southern belle because I don't know how to do any other accent, and I like to imagine you as a sweet, innocent country bumpkin. You'll see, it won't hurt. Now, little Fields, I do not believe that taking a home tour is a very podcast-friendly activity. Have you entirely lost your mind? Now that is a very good question, my dear. I ask myself that same question at least 3 times a day. I think you'll see, though, the house tour I'm going to take you on is worth the podcasting unfriendly detour. I have the distinct suspicion that you are going to go off on a tangent today, Lilyfields, and I am fearing the worst. For several years, I have been trying to figure out how to pursue my ideal life. I have had a very simple core thought. What can I do right now so that future me will thank me? This is a weird line of thought, I know, but it was how I was able to express love to myself when everything else was just a jumbled mess. My dear Cinderella, I assure you, although you are a spry young thing with all of your life ahead of you, if you listen to what I have to say today and put even a tiny bit of it into practice, future you will thank you. It's my birthday this week, and I want to get up on my birthday soapbox for a minute and say this. I want to publicly thank past me for the things that she did to make my life easier today. I want to thank past me for not giving up on building routines and habits that today help keep me sane. I want to thank past me for believing that there was a future and a hope for my life. It was never easy, rarely fun, but making the decision to prioritize future me over present me was easily the most fruitful act of self-love I could have engaged in. You, Cinderella, loving yourself is the best gift you can give yourself. That was my tangent for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Happy birthday to me. On with the show. Today, we are talking about mental health. Mental health. That is a buzzy pair of words now, isn't it? It's a wide-ranging topic which deals with the state of our well-being, psychologically, socially, and emotionally. These factors are all deeply intertwined. You don't need me to define those 3 factors for you, and I am in no way qualified to provide anything new on this topic, but I am your fairy godmother, so let's talk. There are so many elements that impact our mental health. Genetics is a factor. Many of us can trace back symptoms of bipolarism or narcissistic personality disorder back through generations. Genetics are not determinative, but we can have genetic predispositions towards more fragile mental health. there are our life experiences, our childhoods, and our parental attachment styles that can impact our mental health too. For example, I don't know what I did to my youngest child, but he cannot stand it when he doesn't know exactly where everyone in our family is at all times. I wish I could pinpoint one experience, I don't know, where he got left somewhere or where somebody got left somewhere, I don't know, but that could have created this fear of abandonment in him. And I hope that with time it will become less rigid, but boy, oh boy, watching him deal with this every day proves to me just how important our formative years are and just how subtle an experience needs to be to create insecurities in our psyches. Deep-seated mental health issues like genetics and childhood trauma are not the issues that we're going to tackle today. These are best taken up with a mental health professional, and if you need one, or even suspect that you need one, I would recommend that you find one. Today, we're going to be talking about aspects of mental hygiene, things that are within our control, and how we can pursue our ideal life in the area of our mental health. Part 1, the ideal life. I want you to imagine that you just entered a beautiful home. You wander from room to room and you arrive in an office that has an abstract stained glass window. The large pane is made up of many different color circles, which all overlap in different ways. It's breathtakingly exquisite. At the overlap of the circles, the colors change, mixing in glorious ways. I want you to imagine that this stained glass window is your life. Each of those circles is a different area of your life: work, family, health, personal style, spirituality, commitments, marriage. The places where they overlap are the unique ways that you live out those areas with the resources that you have: your time, your talent, and your treasure. Each one of us imagines our ideal life differently, and on this podcast, we seek to define what each of those circles of that gorgeous Venn diagram means to us. We start by asking ourselves the question, in my ideal life, I am a person who? Who what? When I first started asking myself that question, I ended up with 19 overarching themes. Today, we're looking at the theme of mental health. Here is a sampling of some of my ideal life statements for the topic of mental health. In my ideal life, I am a person who doesn't have panic attacks, recognizes when it's hormones that are making me feel crazy, is even-keeled. In my ideal life, I am a person who doesn't make a mountain out of a molehill. I'm a person who holds her tongue when hormones start roiling. I let emotional cycles complete. And in my ideal life, I'm a person who has a healthy outlet for my rage. Side note, there is a reason that we are most fertile when we're young and go through menopause when we're closer to 50. Raising small children and going through menopause at the same time make for uncomfortable bedfellows. As a discrete activity, there is nothing easy about raising small children, and likewise, there is nothing easy about going through menopause. Doing these two unavoidable activities at the very same time? 0 stars, do not recommend. Part 2, the menopause watch party. I've talked about this before, but at the overlap of our mental health and the topic of our bodies lies the topic of menopause. A million years ago, before I began puberty, my mother did something very cool. She prepared me for puberty. She explained to me what was going to happen, and when I got my first period, I was not scared. I actually was kind of proud. I had been armed with information, had gotten answers to my questions, and I knew what to do. I don't have daughters, and I must say that is one part of parenting that I almost kind of regret that I won't get to do. My mother gave me an amazing parenting example about that. Since I have no daughters of my own, I have made it a bit of my mission as your fairy godmother to prepare you for your menopause. Call me the menopause fairy, if you will. The tricky thing with this is that it isn't as simple as, well, one day you're going to stop bleeding and here's how you deal with it. Menopause is a sneaky little vixen. Yes, she is the wicked witch in our fairy tale. Not to be confused with Alayela, your wicked stepsister, who is absolutely kooky and delightful. This villainess starts teasing her arrival years before she actually decides to grace us with her presence. She makes us feel wildly uncomfortable in our own bodies and in our own minds. Now, given that I know that the majority of my listeners are between the ages of 39 and 44, I must admonish you, my fabulous Cinderellas, you can already make this transition easier for yourself, even if that sneaky little vixen is years off. You can make your life simple by building a habit of tracking your monthly cycles. Track your symptoms. Track when you get hormonal pimples. Track your libido. Track the length of your cycle. Track when you start to feel bloated, or track when you look 6 months pregnant even though you aren't. I learned how to do this years ago when I was trying to get pregnant, and it became a habit that I never dropped. And so, when in January 2019, my usually clockwork periods and symptoms started to get wacky, a few days early or a few days late, or with an insane libido shift, mood swings like a teenage prom queen, memory problems, and 3 days a month during which I would have people asking me when my baby was due, I knew something was up. But the very first symptom was a period that came 3 days earlier than usual. This was a red flag that helped me put all the other oddities into perspective, and quickly. Of course, I talked to my OBGYN about it, and he dared say to me, "Well, madame, everyone goes through it. You're not the first, and you won't be the last." Even though he couldn't or wouldn't educate me, I did everything in my power to read up on the subject. Just like my mother had before I got my first period, I interrogated friends about their symptoms. I became a person who asks really prying questions. Now, that said, most women I talked to were not opposed to sharing their experiences. They had just never been asked about it before. And you know the silver lining of all of this? We usually ended up laughing about how odd this whole process is. By being active about learning what I could possibly be up against, I was able to identify the symptoms and put them into words for myself, and therefore I was able to relativize. One particular topic that I explored was that of the overlap between mental health and creativity, which is, incidentally, one of the circles on the Venn diagram of our lives. The overlap of those two is an enormous support system for menopause. I had been reading up on some different natural-ish ways to handle the mood swings that accompany the hormonal turmoil of menopause. May I remind you that while I may not look or sound like it, I am someone with a very high tolerance threshold for pain. And I was quite adamant about, for example, having natural childbirth experiences. I have, over my short 45 years, had to learn to love and trust my body through all sorts of different changes and miniature crises. These were all fine and dandy with various degrees of physical pain that I had to face. The physical pain, in many ways, it made it seem real, like something was happening. And as they say, no pain, no gain, right? Well, menopause ain't so satisfying as all that. Menopause hasn't, so far, caused much more physical pain than the fact that I can't button my favorite pants after 4 p.m. anymore, or the sundry night sweats and momentary nausea just before a hot flash. What menopause has done has made me the very most short-tempered and ill-humored version of myself. Like, to the point that I don't think a day in the past month has gone by where I haven't muttered to myself something that you might hear a sailor shout at a trucker. Not to mention the rage that stirs up a storm like a storm on Lake Erie. Fast, nasty, and short-lived. I have theories about this. Lots and lots of theories. Like, for example, our bodies hold on to repressed emotions, and my theory goes that menopause is when the pressure of that repression finally cracks. The more unexpressed emotions we have, the longer it will take, or the more uncomfortable the symptoms. Again, just a theory that I invented. But I like my theory. It makes me feel like I have a tiny bit of power, in that if I can figure out how to express some of my rage in a safe way, maybe I can help my body along. I know this is not scientific, but it makes me feel like I'm doing something to help. At the very worst, it's a placebo effect. All of this to say, I have only found 2 things that keep my rage under control, and they are, number 1, drying my hair with a hairdryer, and number 2, sewing. It's as if the roar of the machine channels the roar of my rage and provides some kind of catharsis. Thus, why I've been having really good hair lately, and also why I have been sewing like a maniac. Imagine my delight when my philosopher husband shared with me the Freudian notion of sublimation. Freud says that sublimation is when we take our societally unacceptable impulses. Of course, Freud always takes everything back to sexual impulses, but plenty of other thinkers link this notion to the displacement of any undesirable or unacceptable behavior. And then we learn to turn them into socially acceptable actions. In the long term, even retraining the initially unacceptable impulse. While this doesn't exactly prove my theory about repression and menopause discomforts, it makes me think that perhaps there was something helpful to the drive to be creative as an outlet for rage. And in a few weeks, I'm going to bring my indulgent husband back, and he is going to talk to us about this. Now, at the same time as I was finding some relief from the rage by refashioning, literally tearing apart something, in my case, an item of clothing that already existed, and turning it into something else. Interesting to note that the idea of creating something from scratch does not interest me at all, illustrating this idea that I must destroy something, which is an unacceptable social urge, first, in order to find comfort. I started to look into other ways to understand my rage. I read up on this and found an article about menopausal rage, and there it said, in black and white, that creativity was a way to help. So here's where the philosopher princess is going to show up, and she's going to go a tad deeper into her own proprietary and unscientific theory on the sublimation of menopausal rage and creativity. No, I think she fell back asleep. Well, a while back, I told you about how I had once taken a bathrobe, the one I brought to the maternity ward when having my first child. I had taken that bathrobe and turned it into a cute little blouse. You see, my experience in the maternity ward had been less than stellar, and every time I would see that bathrobe, I would seethe with rage. When I was working on my bathrobe refashion, I noticed that the act of taking a seam ripper and removing the sleeves was like opening the valve on a pressure cooker. That's really how it felt. There was an initial violent plume of anger that escaped, and suddenly, the bathrobe no longer contained the emotional fumes of my rage about the circumstances of my first child's birth. Suddenly, it was just a piece of beautiful quality striped fabric. It was a beautiful bathrobe to begin with. Tearing it apart made me feel powerful. Reclaiming power over a situation in which we lost our power is an effective way to deal with rage. Creativity holds the key to redrawing the lines of our rage, channeling it into socially acceptable behaviors. Wow. I just threw a ton at you in one section, and I'm really sorry about that, but let's recap. Even if you aren't perimenopausal yet, you can make your life easier for future you by tracking your periods and symptoms today. Also, finding outlets for the rage you will inevitably be facing as your hormones start roller coastering is important, because once it starts, you have no idea how long it's going to last, but you have the power to redirect that rage into something beautiful.
Elle me fait bondir et vibrer, crier. Elle me donne envie de chanter, danser. Elle pousse à agir, donner, partager et tout simplement de sourire aimer.
Part 3. Mental Hygiene. I was lecturing my children about flossing the other day. Flossing as in dental hygiene, not that weird dance thing. It started because one of them had been eating a lot of sweets, and he quite cavalierly said, "I brush my teeth before bed. I don't need to worry about cavities." Well, this raised my fairy godmother hackles. I launched into a diatribe about how it is not enough to just brush your teeth before bed. Eating sweets, or drinking sodas, or coffee, these are all bad for our teeth. These can't just be counteracted by brushing our teeth before bed. Our mouths are healthier when we avoid this kind of thing. Well, this was news, apparently, to them. "But you drink coffee, Mama," came the reply. "And besides, what would Dennis do all day if everyone stopped eating candy?" Side note, it really kind of stinks when children start making reasoned arguments. Whether or not they are based on false premises, the fact that they are capable of arguing me into a corner for a quick moment makes me nervous for the future. Anywho, that's when I explained to them an argument that I created completely by the seat of my orange petticoat, that there are 3 important ways that we manage our health: prevention, maintenance, and repair. Blah, 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 blah. While I droned on and on, my brain took leave for a few minutes, and I had a bit of a realization, an epiphany, if you will. I need to practice better mental hygiene. Just like invest in my dental hygiene, I need to invest in my mental hygiene. After I dropped the boys off to school that day, I sat down, opened to a blank page in my notebook, and I wrote mental health at the top. Then I divided the page in 3, and I wrote prevention, maintenance, repair. I did a little bit of a mind map. I brainstormed. I just let my thoughts freely associate about what this meant to me. I really encourage you to do this too, because for each of us, it's going to take on a slightly different focus. Nonetheless, I want to share some of my thoughts about this. When it comes to dental hygiene, prevention would be things like not eating sweets or drinking too much coffee, avoiding things that would damage my teeth. How is this related to mental health? What is my mental health equivalent of Skittles? My immediate knee-jerk reaction was Twitter. Twitter is where I get a lot of my news from these days, and it is also a place that causes me a huge amount of anxiety because what I'm hearing about in the news is not necessarily good news. The proof that I am getting caught up in things that I don't need to be caught up in is that I have become emotionally invested in the success of a candidate for the relatively obscure race in Texas for the Texas Railroad Commissioner. This makes absolutely no sense to me or to anyone that I live with or know, since I don't live in Texas. I have never lived in Texas, and I have only ever been there once for like 12 hours. That said, please vote for Luke Warford for Texas Railroad Commissioner. I can't believe I just said that. After careful consideration, though, I realized that social media in general is my coffee, my soda, and my Skittles. If I wanted to prevent anxiety, stress, or anger and improve my emotional well-being, I needed to use social media more sparingly. I don't want to entirely disengage. I mean, I like social media. But I did want to take one serious preventative measure to improve my mental hygiene. So, I decided that for 2 hours each day, during the lunchtime hours, because, yes, remember, here in France, lunch lasts 2 hours. That is from 12 to 2 every day, I would turn off my devices. Next, maintenance. What would mental hygiene maintenance look like? It would look like making sure I get enough sleep, because I know that for me, bad sleep equals bad mental health. It would mean being more considerate about how I make commitments. It would mean developing habits that will help reduce stress and make me feel less crazy, like knowing where I put my keys, my phone, my purse, and my shoes. Maintaining good mental health would also mean engaging in activities that I enjoy, like making music and being creative, hacking that sublimation loop I talked about earlier. Lastly, what would mental health repair look like? My first thought was therapy, and I stick by that. Professional mental health support when you need it is like going to the dentist when your teeth hurt. It shouldn't have to get to that point, but if it does, there are professionals who can help you. I also think that repair can, in a smaller way, look like taking a day or a morning off to do absolutely nothing. It can also look like reevaluating our schedules and our responsibilities and making decisions that will allow us to be more serene. In just a few short weeks, we are going to start talking about curiosity. Curiosity about ourselves is an element to mental health that should not be overlooked. Getting to know ourselves and what is meaningful prevention, maintenance, and repair is going to be part of our discussion. The ideal life exercise. As we do with each of these themes, I ask myself 4 easy questions about the theme that we're covering. This is an exercise I do every morning, just one topic each day. So this week, we're going to ask those 4 questions about mental health. Number 1, what is working? The fact that my indulgent husband and I sat down the week before school started and planned out our calendar allowed me to start the school year with serenity that I have rarely ever known before. This totally worked, and it makes me feel like I'm on top of the world. What's working for you? Is there an area of stress that you have started to make progress in? Did you take a mental health day? Write that down. Number 2, what isn't working? This could be anything. Are you too busy? Are you feeling triggered by the news? You aren't here to judge yourself for something that's not working. Just put it into words. Number 3, what do I need to think about? How can you repair what isn't working? Is it an easy fix? Do you need to enlist the help of someone else? For context, scheduling and planning has always been an enormous source of stress for me. The fact that my husband sat down with me to plan, it meant that I didn't have to carry that burden all on my own. So, who can help you deal with your anxiety-causing issues? Number 4, what can I do today to get me closer to my ideal life? This is just one tiny little thing that you can do today to get you closer. Start tracking your period or spend some time being creative. Of all the things you might need to do to work on your mental health, do just one thing today. Your psychological and emotional experience of your life is just as real as your physical experience of it. Being attentive to your mental health pays dividends in your experience of your life. No one is asking you to be happy all the time, but learning to prevent negative thoughts from seeping in, building good habits that help pressure to release, and knowing where to go to seek help when our mental health is suffering are 3 critical elements to mental hygiene. Think about mental hygiene as the steps you take to take care of future you. Through the magic of fairy dust, I can already hear future you thanking present you. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on your podcatcher, and please, if you enjoy something you've heard here, share it with somebody you think could use a fairy godmother too. In the show notes, I'll put a few links to some articles I wrote about refashioning. They're kind of funny, and I think that you might get a little something out of it too. I want to give a great big thank you to 7 Productions here in Mulhouse, France for the use of the song La Joie as the intro and outro of the show. A huge thank you to Matt Kugler who sang it, and to Claude Ekwe who wrote it. This is your fairy godmother signing off. Just remember, it is never too late to start singing with your feet.